I woke up with a jolt, my head pounding, my mouth dry. The cold air hit me first. It felt damp, like I was underground. I tried to move, but my wrists were tied to the arms of a wooden chair, my ankles bound to its legs. Panic hit me hard, the ropes cutting into my skin as I struggled. I didn't know where I was. I couldn't remember how I got there. The only thing I knew was that I was trapped. The room was dim, lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls looked like rough concrete, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the light. No windows, no other doors, just me, in a chair, tied and helpless. My heart raced, thumping in my ears as I tried to piece together the last thing I remembered. I had been at home, I think. Or maybe out. I couldn't be sure. The pain in my head made it hard to focus, and every time I tried to think back, it felt like trying to grab smoke. Then I heard footsteps. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and a man stepped down. My stomach dropped. He wasn't wearing a mask. He didn't hide his face. He looked normal, like someone you'd pass on the street and not think twice about. But the way he smiled, so calm, sent a chill through me. He knew something I didn't. He spoke, but his voice was too calm, too casual, like we were friends meeting for coffee. "You always sit at that little cafe on 7th Street, don't you? Black coffee? No sugar?" I froze. How did he know that? He took a few steps closer, hands in his pockets, still smiling. "And the way you walk your dog around the park, same path every time. You like routine, don't you?" The room seemed to close in on me. These were things only someone close to me should know. But I didn't know him. I had never seen him before, at least I didn't think so. "What do you want?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out shaky. I expected him to ask for money, for a ransom or something, but he just tilted his head slightly, still smiling that sick smile. "It's not about that." He pulled up a chair and sat down, facing me. "It's not about anything, really." I didn't understand. My mind raced, searching for answers, for any clue. Why was I here? Why was he doing this? But every time I tried to make sense of it, his calmness threw me off. He wasn't angry. He wasn't threatening me. He just liked that I was there. "You don't have to struggle," he said, almost like a teacher talking to a student. "No one's coming. You know that, right?" His words sank into me like ice. No one's coming. He continued talking, telling me more about my life, more details that only I would know. Where I worked, the bar I liked to go to with friends. It was like he had been there, watching, but I couldn't place him. My memory felt like it was wrapped in fog. Then something clicked. I had seen him before, at the coffee shop, in the grocery store. He had been there, always in the background, just a face in the crowd I'd never noticed, but now I remembered. He had been following me. How long had this been going on? I yanked at the ropes again, harder this time. The chair creaked under the strain, but the ropes didn't budge. He just watched, amused, like I was a tight. My wrists burned, the rough rope digging deeper into my skin with each pull, but I had to try. I couldn't just sit there. "You can't get out," he said softly, almost like he felt sorry for me. "I've been planning this for a long time." My breath came faster. Time stretched on forever, every second feeling like an hour. I tried to focus on anything I could use to escape. The ropes were tight, but if I could just get one hand free. I tugged, slowly this time, hoping he wouldn't notice. But he did. "Don't bother," he said. "You won't get out. And even if you did, where would you go?" I stopped pulling for a moment, trying to think. There had to be something, some way out. But every time I thought I had an idea, his voice cut through, reminding me how hopeless it was. "No one's coming. No one will find you. I didn't know how long I had been sitting there, but it felt like hours. My mind raced through every possible scenario. Maybe someone would notice I was missing, maybe a friend or a neighbor, but the way he talked, so sure, made me doubt it. Suddenly, he stood up. Without another word, he walked to the stairs and left, the door slamming shut behind him. The sound echoed in the basement, and then there was silence again. I was alone, still tied to the chair, still trapped. I stared at the door, my breath coming fast, my body shaking. He could come back at any moment, but he could also leave me here, alone, forever. I didn't know which was worse. As the minutes passed, something even more terrifying hit me. This wasn't the first time. I didn't plan to drive that late. It was already past midnight, but I couldn't stay in that house any longer. The silence was too heavy, the memories too loud. So I grabbed my keys and left, hoping the quiet of the empty road would calm me down. The highway was dark and empty, except for the faint glow of streetlights every few miles. I turned up the radio, trying to keep myself awake. I hadn't seen another car in at least an hour, and that's when I noticed it, a pair of headlights in the distance behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Just another driver, probably trying to get home, same as me. But then, something felt wrong. As the car got closer, I sped up without really thinking about it. The road was straight, no reason to worry, right? But the headlights kept following, getting closer, matching my speed. I pushed down harder on the gas. 70, 80, still there. My heart started pounding as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The car was too close now, way too close. It didn't make sense. Why weren't they passing me? I tried to calm down, telling myself it was probably just some idiot tailgating for fun. But the fear inside me was growing, and my hands felt sweaty against the steering wheel. I slowed down, hoping they would just go around, but they didn't. They stayed right behind me, matching every move I made. I couldn't take it anymore. I swerved into another lane, almost losing control of the car. They did the same. I took a sharp turn off the main road, tires screeching on the asphalt. They followed, keeping up easily, like they knew what I was going to do before I even did it. My stomach was tight with panic now, my mind racing. Who was this? Why were they following me? No matter how fast I drove or how many turns I made, they stuck to me, like a shadow I couldn't escape. I was out of options. My chest felt like it was going to explode. I didn't know what else to do, so I pulled over, heart hammering in my chest. My breathing was shaky, uneven. Maybe, I thought, I could confront them, ask what they wanted. I didn't feel brave, but I had no choice. The car behind me stopped too, a few feet back. The headlights stayed on, blinding me in the rearview mirror. My hands were shaking so much I could barely open the door. I stepped out, trying to look confident, but my legs felt like jelly. That's when the driver's door opened, and a man got out. I couldn't see his face at first, just his outline in the headlights. He didn't rush, didn't shout. He just started walking towards me, slowly, like he had all the time in the world. A shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to run back to my car, but my feet wouldn't move. Then, he spoke, his voice calm, almost friendly. "You've been driving for a while, haven't you?" I froze. Something about his voice, familiar but wrong, like he knew me. "I know you," he said. "I know what you've done." My mouth went dry, and I couldn't form words. I didn't know him. I couldn't know him. But then he started talking. He told me things no one else could know, not even my closest friends. He knew about that night 2 years ago, the one I never talked about. The night I made that mistake. The night I hurt someone. How could he know? I felt my knees buckle, my vision blurring as he got closer. I wanted to run, but I was frozen in place, trapped in my own nightmare. He wasn't yelling, He didn't have to. Every word he said was like a knife cutting into me. "You think you've moved on, but you can't hide from it," he said, his voice soft, almost kind. "You can't hide from me." I didn't know what to say. My thoughts were spinning too fast. I wanted to believe this was some kind of sick joke, that he was bluffing. But every detail he said, every secret he exposed, made it clear he knew everything. Things I hadn't told anyone, things I'd buried deep inside. "Who are you?" I finally whispered, my voice shaking. He smiled then, a smile that sent chills down my spine. "Does it matter?" I took a step back, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I couldn't stay here. I had to get away from him. But as I moved towards my car, he just stood there, watching me like he already knew what I was going to do next. "I'll be seeing you again," he said, his voice echoing in the still night. Without thinking, I jumped back into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, locking it quickly. My hands fumbled with the keys as I started the car. I didn't even look back as I sped off, the tires screeching against the road. But as I drove away, my mind was spinning. Who was he? How did he know everything? And then it hit me. Maybe it wasn't about who he was. Maybe it was about what I'd done. Maybe, no matter how far I drove, I could never escape it. I kept driving, but the feeling didn't go away. The road stretched on ahead, dark and endless, and I had the sickening sense that no matter how fast I went, the headlights would always be there, right behind me. So, this happened last year, and I've been trying to forget about it, but I can't. I still don't know if I imagine half of what happened, but writing it down might help. Maybe you guys can tell me if I'm losing it or not. My friend Tim and I decided to go hiking in the mountains one weekend. Nothing extreme. We're not those hardcore outdoorsy people, but we wanted to get away, clear our heads a bit. Life had been stressful, and the idea of walking in the quiet of the woods sounded perfect. We started early, and for the first few hours, it was great. Just us, the trees, and that feeling of being far from everything. The path was a bit rougher than we expected, and the weather started to turn. Dark clouds gathered in the distance, making the air feel heavy. I suggested we turn back, but Tim shrugged it off, said we could push on for a bit longer. I didn't want to argue, so we kept going. Then, it happened. We were walking along a narrow ridge when Tim lost his footing. It happened so fast. 1 second, he was there, right in front of me, and the next, he was tumbling down the side of the hill. I remember shouting his name, my voice echoing off the rocks, but all I could see was dust and scattered branches. I scrambled down as fast as I could, slipping a few times myself. My heart was pounding, panic clawing at my chest. When I finally found him, he was lying there, face down, not moving. For a few terrifying moments, I thought he was dead. But then he groaned and started to stir. Relief hit me so hard I felt dizzy. I helped him up, but something wasn't right. He didn't seem like himself. His eyes were unfocused, and when I asked if he was okay, he just stared at me for a long time before saying he was fine. The way he said it didn't feel convincing, though. It was like he was just saying what he thought I wanted to hear. Still, I figured maybe he was just in shock. He had taken a pretty hard fall, after all. We needed to get back to the main trail, find some help. But as we walked, his silence started to bother me. Tim's usually a talker. He never shuts up, honestly. But now, he was so quiet. Too quiet. At first, I tried to make small talk, anything to fill the growing tension between us. He barely responded, just nodding or giving one-word answers. But then, I noticed him staring at me. Not like normal, more like he was studying me, like I was someone he didn't know. It was weird, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. Then, he started saying things I knew I hadn't told him. Casual at first. Things about my family, stories I'd told him years ago, but with small details changed, like he was getting them wrong on purpose. He laughed it off when I mentioned it, like it wasn't a big deal. But then, it got personal. We were walking through a dense part of the forest when he suddenly asked about my brother. That wouldn't be weird, except I've never told Tim anything about him. My brother died when I was young and I don't talk about it, not with anyone. I froze, confused and angry, and demanded how he knew. Tim just smiled, this slow, unsettling smile that sent a chill down my spine. "You told me," he said, "but I hadn't. I was sure of it." The questions kept coming. Things only I could know. Memories from my childhood, private moments. Every time I asked him how he knew, he acted like it was nothing. I started feeling sick, like the air around me was getting heavier. I wanted to scream at him, but my throat felt tight, like something was closing in. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped walking and confronted him. I demanded to know what was going on, why he was acting like this. I expected him to laugh it off, make some dumb joke, but he didn't. Instead, his expression changed. His face went blank, his eyes cold. "What's wrong with you?" I asked, my voice shaky. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, almost too calmly, he reached into his pocket. I noticed it earlier, him gripping something in there, but I thought it was just his phone. Now, though, I wasn't so sure. "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping back. He smiled again, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You'll see." That was it. I bolted, running through the trees, not caring about the trail anymore. I heard him calling after me, his voice calm, too calm. "You can't run from me. I know you, remember?" His voice echoed around me, and it didn't sound right. It sounded wrong, like it was too familiar, like he knew things I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't stop running until I couldn't hear him anymore. By the time I found my way back to the main path, it was dark. I didn't look back, just kept going until I found help. I told the park rangers what had happened, but they didn't find him. They searched for days, but Tim was gone. I don't know if he's still out there. I don't know if that was really him I found after the fall. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, if maybe the stress of the hike, the accident, made me lose it. But deep down, I don't think that's true. I think something happened to Tim when he fell, something I can't explain, and whatever it was, it knew too much about me. Last night I woke up to a noise. It wasn't loud at first, just the sound of something or someone moving around. I thought maybe I was dreaming, so I lay there in bed, hoping it would go away. It didn't. I live alone, so the thought that there was someone else in the house made my heart pound. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe I left a window open, or maybe it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew better. I reached for my phone and pulled up the security camera feed. I had set up cameras all around the house a few months ago after a few strange break-ins had happened in my neighborhood. I didn't think I'd ever need them, but now I was glad I had them. The screen flickered to life, and my stomach dropped. There, in the living room, was someone moving slowly. It wasn't a burglar, though. The figure was too familiar, too much like someone I knew. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but I couldn't. It wasn't possible. The person I was looking at, they had been declared dead a week ago. I had gone to the funeral. I had seen the body, or at least I thought I had. I remember standing there, feeling the cold sadness in the air, the grief hanging heavy over the crowd. There was no way they could be here, in my house, moving around like nothing had happened. But there they were, clear as day, on my screen. I froze, unable to think straight. Was this some kind of sick joke? Someone messing with me? But why? And how? My hands shook as I stared at the screen. Just as I was about to zoom in to get a better look, the feed went black. Panic hit me like a wave. I tried to turn the cameras back on, but they wouldn't work. My phone screen flickered, showing nothing but darkness. I could feel the silence pressing in on me. The sound of my own breathing, suddenly too loud. And that's when I realized the person in the living room was still in the house. I could hear the faint creaking of the floorboards under their feet, getting closer. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, grabbing my phone. I dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. That's never happened before. I tried again. Still nothing. The footsteps were getting louder now, moving towards my bedroom door. I thought about running, but the thought of running into them stopped me cold. I didn't want to see them face to face. I didn't want to know if this was real. Instead, I crouched behind the bed, trying to make myself as small as possible. My breath was coming in short, sharp gasps, and I covered my mouth with my hand, praying they wouldn't hear me. The room felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. I wanted to scream, but I knew I couldn't. The footsteps stopped. I strained my ears, waiting for any sound, any clue that they were leaving. But there was nothing. Silence. I stayed still, not daring to move. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening. I thought back to the funeral. There had been something off about it, I realize now. I hadn't noticed it at the time, but there had been whispers. People had talked about how strange everything was, how the death had been sudden, unexpected. I hadn't paid much attention. I was too caught up in my own grief. Now, though, I couldn't help but wonder, had something been wrong from the start? Maybe the person hadn't really died. Maybe this was their way of telling me something. Or maybe I was losing my mind. I didn't know anymore. A sudden noise snapped me back to the present. The door to my bedroom creaked open. My heart felt like it stopped in my chest. They were here, right outside the door. I could see the faint outline of their shadow on the floor. My mind screamed at me to run, to do something, but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in my own fear. The footsteps started again, slow and deliberate, as they walked into the room. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping, praying that they wouldn't see me. I could hear them moving around, their breathing soft, almost calm. It didn't make sense. How could they be so calm when I was about to pass out from fear? The shadow grew closer, and I held my breath. I could feel them standing right behind me, their presence almost tangible. My heart pounded so loud in my ears, I was sure they could hear it. I wanted to turn around to see who or what it was, but I was too scared. And then, silence. For a moment, I thought they had left. Maybe I was safe. Maybe this was all just a horrible dream. But before I could move, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. The story ends here because I don't know what happened next. All I remember is that breath, and then everything went black. When I woke up, it was morning. My house was empty. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was out of place. But the cameras had been ripped out of the walls. Now, I don't know if I imagined everything or if it really happened, but I do know one thing. I can't shake the feeling that they're still watching me, waiting. I haven't slept since. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. I don't know if I should share this, but I need to get it off my chest. This happened a few months ago, and I still can't stop thinking about it. I'm not sure if I'm being paranoid or if it was all just a misunderstanding, but every time I think about that night, I get chills. I was at a party, one of those big, loud ones with too much alcohol and not enough space. By the end of the night, I was tired. A bit tipsy too, but not drunk enough to not realize what was happening. My friends were staying at the party, but I had work early the next morning, so I decided to head home. The walk back to my apartment would have taken me an hour, and there was no way I was up for that. So I ordered a rideshare. Man, it wasn't my first time using rideshare apps. I mean, everyone does it, right? I didn't think twice about it. The driver's profile popped up. Normal guy, good reviews. Everything seemed fine. When the car pulled up, I got in, and the driver greeted me with a casual, "You're going to my address?" I nodded, my mind already zoning out, ready to relax in the back seat. The night was quiet, with only a few cars on the street. It was one of those nights where the silence felt a little too heavy, but I was too tired to care. I remember pulling out my phone, scrolling through social media, and texting a friend, half paying attention to where we were going. It wasn't until about 10 minutes in that I glanced up and noticed something strange. The driver wasn't following the GPS. At first, I didn't panic. Maybe he knew a faster route or was avoiding traffic. But as we kept driving, I saw we were heading into unfamiliar streets, streets I didn't recognize. Dark streets, empty. No other cars, no street lights, just rows of abandoned warehouses and empty lots. "Hey, I think you missed a turn," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though I could feel the unease growing in my chest. The driver didn't answer at first. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, and he kept his eyes on the road. "Shortcut," he finally said, his voice cold, almost rehearsed. That's when I heard the click. The doors. He had locked them. My heart started racing. I wasn't sure if I should panic yet. Maybe it was normal. Maybe the doors just lock when you start driving faster. But when I tried to unlock my door, it didn't budge. The windows wouldn't roll down either. I checked my phone, hoping to call someone, but of course, no signal. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice shaking now. He didn't answer. He just kept driving, his expression blank, focused. Something about the way he was too calm, too quiet, made the panic grow stronger. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a signal, anything, but nothing. We were too far from the city, too isolated. The road stretched endlessly ahead. No buildings, no people, nothing but darkness. "You need to let me out," I said, trying to sound firm, but I could hear the fear in my voice. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, meeting mine for a brief second. That smile. It was a small smile, almost like he found something funny in all of this. "We're almost there," he said, and I felt my stomach drop. "Almost where?" I asked, my voice rising. No answer again. I couldn't take it anymore. I started trying to force the door open, yanking at the handle even though I knew it was locked. I tried kicking the window, but it barely budged. I could feel the car slowing down, and we were approaching an even more deserted area. I had no idea what to do. "Let me out," I shouted, banging on the glass. The driver just chuckled, a low, chilling laugh that made my skin crawl. I thought about throwing myself at him, maybe grabbing the steering wheel, but I was too scared. What if he crashed the car? What if that was exactly what he wanted? The car slowed down as we passed a small gas station, the only sign of life I had seen in what felt like hours. I knew this was my chance. I had to do something, or I wouldn't get out of this. As we passed the station, I threw myself against the back window, screaming as loud as I could, hoping someone, anyone, would hear me. My fist pounded against the glass, and to my shock, a crack formed. I kept hitting, harder, until the window opened just enough for me to scream through the gap. "Help!" I screamed again, my voice desperate, frantic. I saw someone near the gas station, a figure turning toward the car. The driver saw them too. His expression changed. That calm control vanishing. Without a word, he slammed on the gas, speeding away from the station, leaving the figure behind. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. I couldn't stop shaking, even after the car slowed down again. But he didn't try to hurt me. He didn't say another word. He just drove me back to my apartment like nothing had happened. When we finally stopped in front of my building, I stumbled out of the car, not even waiting for him to unlock the door. I ran inside and locked myself in my room, heart still racing. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept waiting for him to come back, for another car to pull up outside. The next morning, I reported him to the rideshare company and the police. They told me they would investigate, but I never heard anything more. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't screamed at that gas station. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, wondering if he's still out. I wasn't expecting anything strange that day. My life has always been pretty quiet. I'm an only child, and things at home were normal, maybe a little too normal. So, when I found a letter in the mail, I didn't think much of it. It had no return address, and the handwriting was neat but unfamiliar. I assumed it was junk, something I could throw away. But for some reason, I opened it. Inside was a short note. "Hello, sibling. I know you don't know me, but I am your brother." My brother? That didn't make sense. I'm an only child. I laughed a little, thinking it was some weird mistake. But as I read further, my smile faded. The letter went on to describe things no one else could know. Our family dog's name, how my dad taught me to ride a bike, a vacation we took to the mountains when I was 10. These weren't things you could find online or guess by chance. Only someone who had been there would know. I crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash, telling myself it was a prank, but my stomach was tight, and I felt uneasy. Who could know all this? That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to the letter. I thought about calling my parents, but something stopped me. It felt ridiculous. Maybe they'd laugh and tell me I was being paranoid, or maybe they wouldn't. A few days later, another letter arrived. This one was longer and more detailed. The person wrote that they had been born before me and given up for adoption. They claimed our parents had never talked about them, pretending they didn't exist. But now, they wanted to find me. This letter mentioned even more private things. Arguments my parents had when I was a kid, things I'd overheard late at night. It felt like someone was watching me, like someone had been there my whole life, silently taking notes. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called my mom, trying to sound casual, asking if there was something she needed to tell me. "What do you mean?" she asked, sounding confused. "Was there ever another child?" "Before me?" I asked, my voice shaky. There was a pause, but then she laughed, brushing it off. "Of course not. Why would you ask something like that?" I felt embarrassed and ended the call. Telling myself I was being paranoid, but something didn't feel right. That laugh, it felt forced, nervous. I decided to dig a little. I looked through old family photos, checked birth records online, even tried asking a few family friends. Everything pointed to the same thing. I was the only child, no record of anyone else. But still, the letters kept coming. Each one was worse than the last. The person wrote about dark secrets in our family, an affair my father had years ago, a baby that was born from it. They said our parents had kept the child hidden, that something terrible had happened, but no one talked about it. I tried confronting my parents again, but they denied everything. My dad got angry when I brought it up. "Drop it," he said, his face tight with frustration. "You don't know what you're talking about." It wasn't like him to get that mad. I could see something in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or guilt. I wasn't sure anymore. But the more they denied it, the more I believed the letters. The final letter arrived a week later. It was short, only a few sentences. "You were never meant to know about me. They kept me hidden because they were ashamed. But I'm still here. I've always been here. And now, I'm coming to see you." That last line sent chills down my spine. I sat in silence, staring at the paper, my hands shaking. The idea of this person, whoever they were, watching me, knowing everything about me. It made my skin crawl. I tried to tell myself it was all a sick joke, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Whoever this person was, they were real, and they were close. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me jump. I locked all the doors, checked the windows twice, and sat in the living room with all the lights on. But nothing happened. It wasn't until the next evening, as I was getting ready for bed, that I heard something. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, moving up the stairs outside my apartment. I froze, listening, hoping it was just a neighbor, but the footsteps stopped right outside my door. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't move. For a second, everything was silent, and then, knock, knock. I held my breath, staring at the door. The knock came again, louder this time. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear. Then, a voice. It was quiet, almost a whisper, but I could hear it clearly. "I know you're in there. Open the door." I backed away, my heart racing, but I couldn't bring myself to move any further. The voice continued, soft but insistent. "We need to talk. We're family, after all." I don't know how long I stood there, listening to the voice. It felt like hours, but eventually, the knocking stopped, and the footsteps retreated. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even move until the sun came up. It's been a week since then, and I haven't heard anything else. No more letters, no more footsteps. But I know this isn't over. Whoever they are, they're still out there, and they know where I live. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm losing my mind, but I can't shake the feeling that they're watching me, waiting for the right moment to come back. So this happened last month, and honestly, I still don't know what to make of it. I'm writing this here because maybe someone can explain what's going on, or maybe it will help me feel less crazy. It started when my coworker Alan invited me to his housewarming party. We work in the same department, but we're not close friends or anything. I don't even know him that well. But he had been talking about his new house for a few weeks, how he finally bought a place in a quiet neighborhood, how he was excited to make it his own. When he invited me to the party, I felt like I should go, be friendly, make some connections at work. The day of the party, I followed the address he texted me. It was about 30 minutes out of town in one of those older, suburban areas that felt kind of run down. When I got there, the house didn't look anything like what I expected. I thought it would be lively, with cars outside, people coming and going, but it was quiet, really quiet. The house was dark, no lights on, no sound of people or music. I double-checked the address. Yeah, it was the right one. I stood there for a minute, feeling stupid for maybe getting the time wrong or something. So I walked up to the front door, knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Now I'm thinking maybe everyone's in the backyard or inside with music too loud to hear. But just as I was about to try knocking again, a woman across the street stepped outside. She looked confused, staring at me. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked, walking closer. "Yeah, my coworker, Alan. He's supposed to be having a party here." I pointed at the house, feeling weird about explaining this to a stranger. The woman looked even more confused now. "That house? No one's lived there for years. It's been empty since, I don't know, maybe 5 years now?" I felt a cold knot in my stomach. "Are you sure? I just got invited here." She shook her head. "No, it's been vacant for a long time. People move in and out of the other houses on the street, but that one's always been empty." I didn't know what to say. She watched me for a minute, then shrugged and walked back into her house. I looked at the dark windows again, feeling like I needed to leave. Fast. As soon as I got back to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Alan. "Hey, where are you? We're all inside. Come in." I stared at the text for a long time, confused. There was no way anyone was inside. I was just at the door, but maybe they were in the back, and I didn't hear them? But something didn't feel right. My gut was telling me to leave. So I drove off. But that's when things got weird. That night, I started getting more texts from Alan. At first, they were casual. "You should have come back, we missed you." Then they got more pushy. "Why did you leave? Come back tomorrow, I'll be there." I didn't respond. It felt too strange. I even thought maybe it was some sort of prank. But then, a few days later, I started seeing a car that looked just like Alan's parked near my apartment. First, I saw it outside my building. Then, it started showing up at random places when I went grocery shopping, or even just driving around town. It was always there. I didn't want to believe it was him, but it was the same car every time. I felt like someone was watching me. I finally tried reaching out to Alan at work, but nobody had seen him. One of my other coworkers told me Alan had taken some personal leave for a while and wasn't coming back for at least a few more weeks. That didn't make any sense to me because he had texted me just a few days ago. When I checked his messages, they all looked normal, like he had sent them. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One night, after weeks of avoiding those texts in that car, I finally decided to dig a little into Alan's background. I don't even know why. Maybe it was paranoia, but I started searching about the neighborhood where that house was. That's when I found a news article about a missing person, someone who disappeared years ago, not long after moving into that very house. The article mentioned the man's name. It wasn't Alan, but it was close enough to make me uncomfortable. It was too much of a coincidence. The next day, I went back to the office and found Alan sitting at his desk like nothing had happened. I approached him, nervous but needing answers. I asked him why he hadn't been answering my calls, why he sent me those messages, and what happened that night with the empty house. He looked at me like I was crazy. "What housewarming party?" he said, laughing it off. "I haven't bought a house." I didn't push it further because his reaction made me feel like I was losing my mind. Maybe I had misunderstood everything. Maybe I had the wrong guy all along. I left the office feeling embarrassed. That night, though, my phone buzzed one last time. A text from Alan. "See you soon." Attached to the message was a picture of the inside of my apartment. The same apartment I was standing in, staring at my phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I froze. I couldn't move. I didn't hear anyone come in. But I knew, somehow, someone had been here, and maybe they were still inside. So, this happened to me about 2 months ago, and I still don't know what to think. I'm not really sure how to explain it in a way that makes sense, but I'll try my best. I hope it doesn't sound too crazy, because it still freaks me out whenever I think about it. Here's what happened. I moved into this new apartment a few months back. Nothing fancy, just a small place that was close to work. I was living alone for the first time, and everything was going fine. It was peaceful, maybe too quiet sometimes, but I liked it. I got used to the silence. I liked not having anyone around, not needing to answer to anyone. One night, I was cleaning my bedroom, rearranging some stuff on a shelf, when I found something strange tucked between two books. It was a small black device, no bigger than a pen cap. At first, I didn't know what it was, but after looking closer, I realized it was a camera. It was pointing right at my bed. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of joke, a prank. Maybe the previous tenant left it behind, or one of my friends was messing with me. I didn't really have many friends though, and the few I had wouldn't do something like this. Still, I laughed it off, thinking it was just a weird coincidence. Who would bother watching me sleep? I'm not exactly interesting. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I connected the camera to my laptop. There were only a few video files saved, so I clicked on the first one. What I saw still sends chills down my spine. In the footage, it was dark, just the dim light from my window, but I could clearly see someone walking through my bedroom. The figure was tall and slow, moving carefully around the room, like they were trying not to wake me. They stood right next to my bed, watching me. I couldn't see their face. They just stood there for what felt like forever before quietly leaving. At first, I thought, this had to be old footage. Maybe it was a maintenance guy from before I moved in. I tried to rationalize it, but the more I watched, the more it didn't make sense. It wasn't just the bedroom. The camera had recorded them moving around the living room too, going through my things, touching stuff like they were looking for something. Then they just disappeared out of frame. I felt uneasy, but I convinced myself it was nothing to worry about. Maybe it was just old footage left on the camera by mistake. Maybe it wasn't even my apartment. I even thought about calling someone, but who would believe me? I didn't want to sound paranoid. I left the camera on my table, deciding to forget about it for the night. The next morning, I woke up with this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I couldn't let it go. I needed to check the camera again, just to be sure. So, I did. I hooked it back up to my laptop, and my heart nearly stopped. There was new footage from last night. In this one, the figure didn't just stand by my bed, they moved closer. At one point, they leaned down as if they were whispering something, but the camera didn't pick up any sound. Then they started touching things. My pillow, my blanket, my face. I watched in horror as they gently brushed their hand over my hair while I slept, completely unaware. I couldn't breathe. I felt sick. I was being watched. I shut the laptop quickly, my hands shaking. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't old footage. This was real. Someone had been in my apartment while I was sleeping. They were watching me. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced with 100 thoughts, each one worse than the last. I couldn't think straight. I kept asking myself how they got in. I always locked my doors, my windows were shut, and I hadn't noticed anything missing. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I noticed before? I was terrified, but I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed my phone and thought about calling the police, but then I stopped. What would I tell them? I didn't have any real proof. The camera could have been planted there by anyone, at any time. It could have been there for days, weeks, or even longer. And what if the person knew I found the camera? What if they were watching me right now, waiting for me to react? I was paranoid. Every little sound made me jump. I spent the rest of the day sitting on my couch, listening for any signs of movement, but nothing happened. It was like the world outside had gone completely still, but inside, I felt trapped. I didn't want to go to sleep that night. I was too scared. But eventually, exhaustion took over and I dozed off. The next morning, I checked the camera again. I don't know why I thought it would be different, but I had to know. This time, the footage showed the figure standing over me for what felt like hours. They never moved, just watched. And then they left. I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed a bag, grabbed what I could, and left. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I didn't care. I called a friend and stayed with them for a few days, trying to figure out what to do next. I never went back to that apartment. I didn't want to know if the camera was still there or if the person would come back. I didn't report it. Maybe I should have, but I just couldn't. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that someone's still watching. I don't know how many of you have been stranded in the middle of nowhere, but it's terrifying. The kind of fear that crawls under your skin and won't leave. That's what happened to me last month. I was driving home after a long trip, feeling exhausted but relieved to be almost there. That was when my car broke down. It wasn't just a flat tire or something I could fix myself. The engine died, and I was stuck. It was late, maybe around midnight. The road was empty, and there were no lights, no houses, nothing. I kept hoping a car would pass, but after an hour, it was clear I was alone. My phone battery was at 8%. barely enough to make a quick call. I tried calling roadside assistance, but of course there was no signal. I felt completely helpless. I started to panic, but told myself to stay calm. Maybe I should sleep in the car and wait until morning. But the idea of being in the middle of nowhere, all alone, felt wrong. It didn't feel safe. Then, just as I was starting to think I might be spending the night in my car, headlights appeared in the distance. Relief washed over me, and I waved my arms to flag the car down. It slowed, and a man, probably in his 40s, pulled over. He had a friendly smile, asked me if I needed help. He seemed normal. His voice was calm, and he didn't look like he was trying to scare me. He even made a joke about how these roads were known for ruining cars. He offered to give me a ride to the nearest town. I hesitated. Getting into a stranger's car at night didn't feel like a good idea, but I was alone, and what choice did I have? I couldn't stay here all night, so I agreed. The moment I sat in his car, something shifted. I don't know how to explain it, but it didn't feel right. At first, he kept talking, asking me where I was headed, what had happened to my car, the usual small talk. But I couldn't focus on what he was saying. My mind was somewhere else. His face, it was familiar. Not in the I know him kind of way, but in the I've seen him before way. Then it hit me. The gas station. I'd stopped earlier in the evening to fill up, and there was a wanted poster on the wall next to the bathroom. I didn't pay much attention at the time, but now it was all coming back. The face on that poster, it looked like him. I told myself it couldn't be the same guy. I mean, what were the chances? But my stomach was in knots, and I started to sweat. I glanced at him again, more closely this time. The eyes, the beard, the way he smiled. It was him. My heart started pounding. I tried to act calm, not letting him see I was freaking out. I thought about asking him to pull over, telling him I didn't feel well or something. But he was driving fast now, and we were far from where he picked me up. I didn't even know where we were. He noticed I was quiet and asked if I was okay. I forced a smile, said I was just tired. But I think he could tell something was wrong. His tone changed, became sharper, like he was testing me. He asked strange questions like, "So, no one knows where you are? And you didn't tell anyone your car broke down, right?" That's when I knew I had to get out of there. I scanned the car for anything that could help me. The doors were locked, and the windows had child safety locks, so I couldn't open them from the inside. My phone was dead now. There was no way I could call for help. He kept driving, faster now, the road blurring past us. I had no idea where he was taking me. My mind raced. Should I jump out of the car? Should I grab the steering wheel and make him crash? But what if I didn't make it? What if I just made things worse? The car suddenly slowed as we approached a small intersection. For a second, I thought about screaming, hoping someone might hear me. But the area was deserted. There was no one. He glanced at me, and I could see the shift in his face. The friendly mask was gone. His smile looked twisted now, and his eyes, they were dark. He knew I had figured him out. Before I could react, he reached down and locked the doors manually, like he was preparing for something. My heart was racing, and I knew this was it. I wasn't going to wait and see what he had planned. I had to act. That's when I saw it. A small metal tool, maybe a screwdriver, lying on the floor near my feet. I don't know why it was there or how it got there, but I didn't care. My hand reached for it, slow and careful, praying he wouldn't notice. I felt its cold handle in my grip, and I knew this was my only chance. I kept my eyes forward, my hand tightening around the tool. He didn't seem to notice, still driving, still in control, but not for long. The story ends here, but I want to leave you with this. Sometimes, when you feel that chill in your spine, when everything in you screams something is wrong, trust it. It could save your life. I trusted mine. I was driving for hours, exhausted, with no clear destination in mind. I just needed somewhere to sleep. That's when I saw it. A small, run-down motel by the side of the road. The neon sign flickered weakly, and only a couple of cars were parked outside. It didn't look like much, but I didn't care. I needed rest. The lobby smelled like old carpet, and the man at the front desk barely looked up as I approached. He was middle-aged with thinning hair and eyes that didn't seem to focus. He handed me the key with a mumbled, "Room 7." That was it. No small talk, nothing. Just the key, like he wanted me out of his sight as soon as possible. I stepped into my room and the air was thick with dust and the scent of something that had gone stale long ago. The bed creaked loudly as I sat down. The walls were thin, with faded wallpaper peeling at the corners. It felt off, but I was too tired to care. I fell asleep quickly, the exhaustion pulling me under. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound. A knock. At first I thought it was the pipes or maybe something outside. It was faint, just a soft tap, tap, tap. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was nothing. But it didn't stop. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Then I heard it. A voice. A soft, desperate whisper coming from the other side of the wall. "Please, let me out." My heart jumped in my chest. Was it coming from the room next door? I hadn't noticed anyone staying there, but maybe I was wrong. I told myself I must have been half asleep, hearing things that weren't there. But the voice came again, this time louder, clearer. "Please, help me." I sat up in bed, every hair on my body standing up. I listened, my ears straining. The voice was muffled, but I was sure it came from the room next to mine. I couldn't just ignore it. Someone was in trouble. I grabbed my phone and left the room, heading straight for the front desk. The same guy was there, still half asleep behind the counter. "Is there someone staying in the room next to mine?" I asked, my voice shaky. The manager looked up, blinking slowly. "What do you mean?" he asked, sounding annoyed. I heard someone, a voice, asking for help. He looked at me for a second, like I was speaking another language. Then he shook his head. "There's no room next to yours." I stared at him. "What do you mean? I just heard someone knocking and—" He cut me off, his tone flat. "The building ends at your room. There's no one there." I felt a cold wave rush over me. How could that be? I was sure I heard it, but his face didn't change. He didn't even seem concerned, just bored. I walked back to my room, my mind spinning. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just too tired, and my mind was playing tricks. But that night, it happened again. The knocking started just after midnight, louder this time. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, the voice came back, crying now, pleading, "Please, I'm trapped. Help me." I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped out of bed and ran to the wall where the sound was coming from. I pressed my ear against it. The voice was right there, just on the other side. I pounded on the wall, my voice shaking as I called out, "Who's there? Are you okay?" No response, just more knocking, and that voice, now so desperate, it sent chills down my spine. I couldn't sleep after that. The knocking stopped eventually, but I stayed awake, my mind racing. If there wasn't a room next to mine, where was the sound coming from? The next morning, I decided to check the wall. I felt along the edges, running my fingers over every crack and seam. That's when I noticed it. Something was off. There was a faint line barely visible, like an outline of a door that had been covered up. My heart raced as I pushed against it, but nothing happened. I found a loose piece of metal in my suitcase and used it to pry at the edges. It took some effort, but after a few minutes, the wall gave way, revealing a hidden door. My stomach dropped. It was real. I pushed the door open slowly and the smell hit me first. Stale, rotten air that made me gag. Inside was a small, dark room. The walls were covered in scratches, deep marks that looked like someone had been trying to claw their way out. There was an old, dirty mattress on the floor, and in one corner, I saw what looked like dried blood. I stumbled back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Someone had been trapped in here. Someone had died here. I ran to the front desk, barely able to get the words out. There's a room, a hidden room. Someone was inside. The manager just stared at me, his face blank. Slowly, he got up from his chair, walking around the counter. I backed away, fear creeping up my spine. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said, his voice calm, almost bored. I turned to run, but before I could move, I felt a sharp pain in my side. I looked down and saw blood. He had stabbed me. I collapsed to the floor, the world spinning. As I lay there, the last thing I heard was the sound of knocking from the hidden room, followed by a faint voice. "Please, let me out." I've always been obsessed with true crime. I don't know why, but reading about unsolved cases just pulls me in. Maybe it's the mystery of it all, or trying to figure out what really happened. So, when I found this online group full of people like me, it felt like I'd finally found a place where I could talk about these things without people thinking I'm weird. We would talk about famous cases, new evidence, theories, everything. It was a pretty normal group, except for this one user. They called themselves Watcher9. Their posts were detailed, too detailed. Whenever we discussed a particular case, they always seemed to know more than anyone else. At first, I thought they were just really into it, maybe a researcher or something. But as we kept talking about this one unsolved murder, things started to feel off. Watcher9 would drop little facts that didn't seem like they came from public sources. Like, we were talking about the crime scene, and they mentioned the exact position of the body and a certain object found near it. Something I had never read about in any article or report. I asked around, and no one else in the group seemed to know about it either. I started getting a weird feeling. I mean, I knew a lot about this case, but how could they know these specific things? I decided to message Watcher9 privately, asking how they knew so much. I thought maybe they had a source or were involved in law enforcement. Their reply was short, almost dismissive. They said they just paid attention and had good sources. Something about it felt wrong. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. Then, a few days later, I got a message from them. It didn't say anything, just had an attachment. I opened it. It was a photo of my apartment building, taken from across the street. I stared at it for a long time, not sure what to do. It felt like a bad joke, but I didn't know what kind of joke this could be. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they somehow found out where I lived because I posted something with my location. I didn't reply. I thought if I ignored it, it would stop. But then, the next day, another message, another photo. This time, the angle was closer. I could see my window. The curtains were closed, but the thought that someone had been outside, looking at my window, made my skin crawl. My hand shook as I closed my phone. For the next few days, I was on edge. I didn't go out much, and every time I did, I looked over my shoulder, scanning the street, the buildings, the faces of people around me. But I didn't see anyone suspicious. No more messages came, and I tried to convince myself that it was just someone messing with me. Then one night, while I was sitting on the couch, I got another notification. My heart sank. Another message. I almost didn't want to open it, but I couldn't stop myself. It was another photo. This one was taken through my window. I stared at the photo, trying to understand what I was seeing. It was a picture of me sitting right there on the couch, exactly like I was now. My stomach twisted, and I felt cold all over. Someone had been right outside my window, watching me. I ran to the window and pulled the curtains back. No one was there. I was shaking. I didn't know what to do. I blocked Watcher 9's account, but more messages kept coming from different usernames. I tried blocking them all, but the photos kept appearing, closer each time. I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing outside, watching me, waiting. I decided to go to the police. I took the photos, showed them everything, but the officer I spoke to barely looked at them before telling me there wasn't much they could do. The photos weren't enough proof that I was in danger, they said. I couldn't believe it. I was terrified, and they didn't seem to care. Feeling defeated, I went home. When I got there, my phone buzzed again. Another message. I didn't want to open it, but I had to. This time, it was different. The photo wasn't from outside. It was taken inside my apartment. It was a picture of my kitchen, my table, the chair I always sit in. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had been inside. I hadn't just been watched from the outside, they had been in my home. I grabbed my phone and started to dial the police, but I froze. I heard something. A creak. My heart pounded in my chest, and I held my breath listening. It was coming from the hallway. Another creak, like a footstep. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. My phone buzzed again. I didn't dare look at it this time. The noise in the hallway grew closer. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. The door to my living room was slightly open, and I could see the dark hallway beyond it. The footsteps stopped right behind the door. Then, silence. I don't know what happened next. The next thing I remember is waking up on the floor, my phone next to me, the screen still lit up with that last message. The door was open, but no one was there. I moved out the next day. I still don't know who Watcher 9 was, or what they wanted from me, but I can't shake the feeling that they're still watching, waiting for the right moment to show up again. I was tired. The kind of tired where your eyes blur and the road starts to feel like it's moving under you. It had been a long day at work, and all I wanted was to get home, sit on the couch, and relax. I was driving back from a meeting in a part of town I didn't usually visit. I thought I knew my way, but when I made that left turn, the road didn't look familiar. I shrugged it off. I'd taken a wrong turn before. I figured I could just keep going and find a main road soon. But as I drove, something felt wrong. The houses on both sides of the street looked identical. Same pale walls, same dull front lawns, no kids playing outside, no cars in the driveways, nothing. It was eerily quiet, and the sun had started to set, making everything look darker and more unsettling. I pulled over to check my phone for directions, but the signal was weak. No map, no GPS. Great, I thought. I decided to keep driving and find my way back to a familiar road. Surely, I'd come across something soon. After a few more minutes, I saw someone standing on the sidewalk. A man, smiling widely, waved at me as I drove by. I slowed down, thinking maybe he could give me directions. When I rolled down the window before I could even ask, he said, "You must be lost. Why don't you come inside? We can help you out." His smile was too wide, like he was forcing it. I felt a weird sense of pressure, but I didn't want to be rude. I told him I was just looking for the main road, and I'd be on my way. But his smile didn't drop. "No need to rush. Come inside. We can give you something to eat, maybe a drink. Stay for a while." I laughed awkwardly and thanked him, but I said I had to get home. The man didn't argue, just nodded, still with that same fake smile. As I drove off, I glanced in the mirror. He was still standing there watching me. My car was the only one on the street. I started to feel nervous. The neighborhood was empty, quiet, and every house looked the same. My heart began to race, and I wanted to leave. I pressed the gas harder, but after what felt like an eternity, I was still in the same area. The streets twisted and turned, but I kept ending up on the same road. Finally, I stopped and decided to turn around. But when I did, my car sputtered and died. Just like that, the engine cut off. I tried to start it again, but nothing happened. The engine wouldn't even turn over. My hands began to shake as I gripped the steering wheel. I was stuck. I looked around hoping to see someone else, but there was nobody, except the man from earlier. He was standing across the street now, still smiling and waving again. My stomach tightened. I got out of the car, hoping to figure out what was wrong with it, but when I popped the hood, everything looked fine. I tried again to start the engine, but it was dead. Footsteps. I turned, and there he was, walking slowly towards me. "Car troubles?" he asked, his voice too friendly, like he was enjoying this. I forced a smile, feeling the panic rise in my chest. "Yeah, I think it just needs a minute," I lied. "I'm sure it'll start again soon." His smile grew wider, if that was even possible. "Why don't you come inside? I can call someone to help you. No need to be out here all alone." I shook my head. "Thanks, but I'll figure it out." My voice was shaking, and I hated how weak it sounded. More people started appearing on the sidewalks, more smiling faces, all walking slowly towards me. They were all too friendly, too eager. My gut screamed at me to leave, to run, but I couldn't. My car was dead, and I didn't know where I was. I walked down the street trying to stay calm, hoping to find another way out of this place. But no matter which direction I turned, the streets twisted and looped back on themselves. Every house looked the same. The people followed me, not running, just walking slowly, like they had all the time in the world. I tried knocking on a few doors, but no one answered. My phone was still dead. No signal. I was alone, surrounded by smiling faces that seemed to be everywhere now, watching me from every corner. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran down the street, my heart pounding in my chest. But every turn led me back to the same spot. It was like the neighborhood was a maze, with no way out. Finally, out of breath, I stopped and looked around. There was one house, identical to all the others, but this one had its door open. Inside, it was dark. I didn't want to go in, but what choice did I have? I stepped inside, the door closing softly behind me. The air was heavy, like the house had been abandoned for years. But then, in the dim light, I saw someone sitting in a chair in the corner, not smiling, not speaking, just watching. "You shouldn't have come here," the person said quietly, their voice cold. Nobody leaves once they arrive. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't understand. I tried to speak, to ask what they meant, but no words came out. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Suddenly, I heard the sound of my car starting outside. My heart leaped with hope. Maybe I could still get out. I ran to the door, flung it open, and saw my car waiting for me, engine running. But when I looked down the road, it stretched endlessly, the same identical houses disappearing into the distance. I wasn't free. I was never going to leave. I first noticed him about a month ago. I was at work, sitting by the window in our small office, when I saw him across the street. He was just standing there, not doing anything, not even looking at his phone like everyone else. At first, I thought he was waiting for someone. People do that all the time, right? But the next day, he was there again. Same spot, same stillness. By the end of the week, it felt like every time I looked out the window, he was there, just watching. I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he worked nearby. Or maybe he was just one of those people who stand around a lot. It's a city. People are weird. But then I started seeing him everywhere. It wasn't just at work anymore. I'd be walking home, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a glimpse of him across the street or in a crowd. I'd turn to get a better look, but he'd already be gone, slipping into the shadows like he was never really there. I began to feel like I was losing my mind. One day at lunch, I casually mentioned it to a colleague. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I played it off like a joke. "Hey, ever get the feeling someone's watching you?" I laughed, hoping they'd laugh too, but all I got was a confused look. "You're imagining things," they said. "Probably just some random guy. Forget about it." Forget about it. I wish I could. Over the next few days, things got worse. Every time I left the office, there he was. If I went to grab a coffee, he'd be standing in the background. He never got close. He never spoke. But he was always there. It was starting to feel personal, like he was there for me. I stopped sleeping well. My mind would race all night, thinking about him, wondering what he wanted. Every little noise made me jump. The shadows outside my window felt alive. I even checked the locks on my door more than once every night, making sure they were secure. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching, waiting for something. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. One evening as I was leaving work, I saw him again, standing just across the parking lot. Something snapped inside me, and before I knew it, I was walking straight toward him. My heart was pounding, but I didn't care. I needed answers. I needed to know why he was there. "Why are you following me?" I demanded, my voice shaky, more out of fear than anger. He didn't flinch. He just looked at me, his face calm, almost bored. Then, in the coldest, most emotionless voice, he said, "You have something that belongs to me." I froze. "What?" "I don't even know you." He stared at me for what felt like forever before repeating, "You have something of mine." And then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I stood there, my mind racing. What could I possibly have that belonged to him? I didn't take anything. I didn't even know who he was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out what he meant. What could I have that he wanted so badly? I started going through my things, digging through old boxes, trying to find something, anything, that could explain what was happening. Old letters, photos, souvenirs. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I even called my family, asking if they remembered anything strange from my past. But there was nothing, just more dead ends. Days passed, and he kept showing up. I'd see him more often now, not just at work, but near my apartment. Sometimes I'd catch him standing at the end of my street, just watching, always from a distance, never too close, but close enough that I knew he was still there. My paranoia was eating me alive. I started avoiding going out, changing my routine, taking different routes home. But no matter what I did, he always found me. It was like a game to him, and I was losing. The last time I saw him was last night. I had reached my breaking point. My nerves were shot, and I couldn't take the constant fear anymore. I saw him standing across the street from my building, just staring, and I decided enough was enough. I grabbed my coat and marched outside, my fists clenched, determined to end this once and for all. When I reached him, I didn't even give him time to speak. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty street. "What did I take from you?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes, something almost like pity. He tilted his head slightly and said, "You took time, my time, and now I'm here to take it back." I didn't understand. Time? What did he mean? "I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, but he just shook his head. "Soon," he said quietly. "You'll understand soon." And then, just like before, he turned and walked away, fading into the night. I haven't seen him since, but I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. I don't know what he meant by time, and I don't know why he's after me. But I know one thing, he'll be back. And when he does, I'm not sure I'll be able to escape. Whatever it is that I've taken, it's something I can't give back. A week ago, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address, no name, just a plain brown box with my address on it. I wasn't expecting anything, so I thought maybe it was a mistake. But my name was clearly printed on it. Inside, there were only two things: a set of keys and a small piece of paper. The paper had a single sentence written on it in neat handwriting. "You know what these open." I stared at the note, confused. I didn't recognize the keys, and I definitely had no idea what they opened. There were 4 keys in total, all different shapes and sizes. I tried to think back to if I'd lost keys before or if they looked familiar, but nothing came to mind. The note bothered me, though. The confidence of the message. It felt like whoever sent it knew something I didn't. I tossed the keys on my kitchen counter, figuring I'd deal with it later. But later turned into days of curiosity gnawing at me. I started thinking about it all the time. What if it was important? What if it was some kind of warning or a clue? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was supposed to know, that maybe I'd forgotten something. So I began trying the keys. First, I thought it must be my house. Maybe I had old locks or something. I tried every door, every cabinet, even the garage. Nothing fit. It was frustrating. Then I tried my car, just to be sure. Of course, the keys didn't match. Work? No luck there either. The more I failed, the more obsessed I became. I took the keys everywhere, hoping to find the lock they fit. I tried my parents' place, friends' houses, even random buildings I thought looked familiar. Nothing. It was like the keys were mocking me, and the message on that note kept echoing in my head. You know what these open. But I didn't. Then, things started to get weird. One night, I came home from work, and my front door was unlocked. I know I locked it before I left. I always double check. I walked through the house, looking for signs of anyone being inside, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my stomach. A few days later, I noticed things missing. Small things, like a pin I always kept on my desk or the lighter from my kitchen drawer. At first, I thought maybe I just misplaced them, but when I found my phone charger under my couch, I knew something wasn't right. I hadn't touched it for weeks. I kept trying the keys, getting more and more desperate. But each failed attempt only made me more anxious. Every time I came home, I checked the locks twice. But still, things would be out of place, move slightly, just enough to let me know someone had been there. The feeling of being watched grew stronger every day. Then the messages started. Texts from an unknown number saying things like, "Did you try the basement?" and "How's the search going?" I had no idea who was sending them. I asked my friends if they were messing with me, but they all seemed genuinely confused. I started seeing people too, strangers hanging around my street, sitting in cars nearby, or just standing in the shadows. Every time I thought I was alone, I'd catch someone watching me out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked directly at them, they'd disappear. My anxiety got worse. I wasn't sleeping much, and every sound at night felt like someone trying to get in. I finally reached out to an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. They used to know about some of the stuff I did back then, things I'd tried to forget. When I told them about the keys, there was a long pause. Then they said something that chilled me. "Those keys, they're from the old place. You remember, don't you?" I didn't. Or maybe I didn't want to. The memories came back in flashes, a place we used to hang out, abandoned, far from town. We did things there, things I'm not proud of. I didn't want to believe that the keys were connected to that, but deep down, I knew they were. I asked them to come with me to help me figure it out, but they refused. "You need to handle this on your own," they said, and then they hung up. I found the place after hours of driving. It was almost completely hidden now, covered in weeds and overgrown trees. The door was still there, though, locked tight. My hands shook as I pulled the keys out. I tried the first one. Nothing. The second one, still nothing. But the third key, it turned. The door creaked open, revealing the dark, damp interior. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The air smelled stale, like no one had been here in years. I remembered bits and pieces, us hanging out here, laughing, but there was something darker, something I didn't want to remember. I walked deeper into the building, and that's when I saw it. A small metal box sitting in the corner. The last key on my ring fit perfectly. My hands were sweating as I opened it, revealing a stack of photos. As I flipped through them, my blood ran cold. They were photos of me, recent ones, walking to work, sitting in my living room, sleeping in my bed. Every moment of my life for the past few weeks had been watched, recorded. I dropped the photos and stumbled back, hearing footsteps behind me. I turned, but no one was there. The door had closed, locking me inside. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another message from that unknown number. "Now you know what they open." I was trapped. I had a long day at work. My head felt heavy. My eyes struggled to stay open. By the time I got to the station, it was almost midnight and the platform was nearly empty. I barely noticed the other people rushing by, each trying to catch their last ride home. I boarded the train, happy to see the car was mostly empty. A few seats were taken, but nobody sat near me. I found a corner, leaned my head against the cold window, and let the soft hum of the train lull me to sleep. When I woke up, the train was still moving. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Too quiet. I sat up straight, trying to shake off the grogginess. I looked around, expecting to see people, but the car was empty. No one in sight. I checked my phone, but it was dead, which was odd because I'm sure it had some battery left when I got on the train. I glanced out the window, but nothing outside looked familiar. No stations, no street lights, just darkness. My heart started to race. I waited, thinking the next stop was coming soon, but the train didn't slow down. It kept going, steady and fast. That's when I started to panic a little. I stood up and walked to the nearest door, hoping to see a station sign. Nothing, just more of the same. Empty tracks and black night. I needed answers. I started walking down the aisle, looking for someone, anyone, but every carriage I passed through was just as empty as the last. I eventually found the conductor. He stood at the far end of the train, a strange man in a neat uniform, staring ahead like he didn't even notice me. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were wide but blank, like he hadn't slept in days. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding shaky even to me. "When is the next stop?" He didn't turn to look at me. Instead, he spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. "This train never stops." I stared at him, not sure if I heard right. "What? No, I mean, when's the next station?" Again, he didn't turn. "This train never stops." "You are the only passenger." I felt a chill run down my spine. "That's not possible," I said, my voice louder now. "I saw other people when I got on." He didn't respond, didn't even blink. Fear gripped me. I rushed past him, moving through more cars, trying to make sense of everything. All the cars were empty, just like before. The windows showed nothing but endless darkness. It was like we weren't moving at all, or worse, like we were moving through nothing. I don't know how long I walked through that train. Time felt different, like hours could have passed, or maybe just minutes. Every car looked the same, Same empty seats, same black windows. My mind started spinning, and the panic kept growing with every step. At one point, I stopped at a door and yanked the handle. It didn't budge. I tried another one and another, but none of the doors opened. I ran to the emergency brake and pulled it with all my strength. Nothing. The train kept moving. It felt like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. I went back to find the conductor again. This time, I demanded answers. "Tell me what's going on," I shouted. "How do I get off this train?" The conductor finally turned his head, slowly, like it took him effort to move. His eyes locked on mine, but there was no life in them. Just emptiness. "This train never stops," he repeated, his voice cold. "You are the only one." I backed away, my chest tightening. I didn't know what to believe anymore. The train felt like a prison now, and I was trapped inside with no way out. I ran back to my seat, my mind racing, trying to figure out how this could be happening. Hours seemed to pass, or maybe days. It was hard to tell. The same endless scenery outside, the same silence inside. I gave up trying to find a way out and just sat there, waiting for something, anything, to change. Then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard it, a crackling sound over the intercom. I sat up, my heart pounding. Maybe someone else was on the train after all. Maybe this nightmare was about to end. A voice came over the speaker, calm and robotic, like a pre-recorded message. "Next stop approaching." Relief flooded me. Finally, I thought, finally this was over. I jumped up from my seat and ran to the window, expecting to see a station. But what I saw made my stomach drop. There was no platform, no lights, no people, just a name, one I had never heard of, glowing faintly on a sign, Station 47. I'd never seen this station before. I hadn't even heard of it. My head was spinning again. How far had we traveled? Where were we? I glanced at the conductor, but he just stood there, staring blankly ahead, as if nothing had changed. The train didn't slow down. It kept moving. I turned back to the window, my breath coming faster now. The station sign faded into the distance, and we were back in the darkness. That's when it hit me. Maybe this train would never stop. Maybe I would ride it forever, always waiting, always hoping for an escape that would never come. And now, I'm not even sure I ever really boarded that train in the first place. I started seeing him a few months ago. At first, I thought it was nothing, just a guy who happened to be in the same places I went. He was always dressed in a dark suit, always clean and neat, which stood out in my neighborhood. It was weird, but I didn't think much of it. You see people around often enough that your mind doesn't question it at first. But after a few weeks, I began to notice him everywhere. It wasn't just my street anymore. He was outside the grocery store, standing near the coffee shop I go to every morning, and even by my gym, always at a distance, never doing anything, just watching. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid. It was a big city, after all. People cross paths, right? But deep down, it felt wrong. Every time I saw him, he would stay far enough away that it wasn't obvious. He wasn't too close, just close enough that I noticed. I kept telling myself it was a coincidence, but my gut was telling me something else. It's hard to explain, but you know that feeling when someone is watching you? That's what I felt, like I was under a microscope. And it got worse. Over time, his presence started to mess with my head. I would check my window before leaving my apartment, scanning the street for him. Sometimes he was there, standing by a lamppost or a parked car. I would see him and feel my heart race. Other days, he wasn't there, but that was almost worse because I couldn't stop wondering where he was. I even tried leaving at different times, taking different routes, but no matter what, he found me. One night, I had enough. I had been out for a late run, and as I was heading back to my building, I saw him again. Same suit, same distance, just standing there on the corner under the streetlight. My heart was pounding, but this time I wasn't going to run. I walked straight toward him. I had to know who he was, why he was following me. My head was spinning, but I needed answers. As I got closer, I could see his face more clearly for the first time. He was older than I thought, gray hair, tired eyes. He didn't look threatening, but something about him felt off, like he didn't belong here. When I finally reached him, I blurted out, "Why are you following me?" He didn't say a word. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Then he handed it to me and walked away. That was it. No words, no explanation. I stood there, frozen, holding the envelope in my hand as he disappeared into the shadows. I waited until I got back to my apartment before opening it. My hands were shaking as I slid the paper out. Inside were photos. But not just any photos. These were pictures of my family, my parents, my sister. All of them taken today. In the pictures, my dad was mowing the lawn, my mom was shopping, my sister was walking her dog. I hadn't been anywhere near them that day, yet someone had been watching them, and now I had the proof in my hands. My mind was racing. I dropped the photos on the floor and started pacing around my apartment, trying to figure out what was happening. Who was this man? Why did he give me these photos? Was my family in danger? My chest tightened with fear. I called my sister, trying to stay calm, but my voice was shaking. She answered, sounding completely normal. When I asked her about her day, she didn't mention anything unusual. No strange men, no feeling of being watched. It was as if nothing was wrong, but I knew better. Over the next few days, I became obsessed. I couldn't stop thinking about those photos, about how close that man had gotten to my family without me knowing. I started avoiding going outside. What if he was still there? I couldn't shake the feeling that more was happening than I understood. My phone calls to my parents and sister became more frequent, but they all said the same thing. Everything was fine. They hadn't noticed anything strange. But how could they not? Someone was watching them. The man in the suit didn't show up again after that night, but I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. Every time I left my apartment, I would scan the street, waiting to see him standing there, staring at me. Even when he wasn't there, I felt like someone was. The paranoia was eating away at me, making it hard to think straight. I would catch myself checking the locks on my doors multiple times, afraid that someone had broken in while I wasn't looking. One morning, I found another envelope slipped under my door. No knock, no sound. Just an envelope waiting for me when I woke up. My hand shook as I opened it, expecting more photos, more proof that my family was being watched. But this time, it was empty. Nothing inside. Just the envelope, a silent message that they were still out there, watching, waiting. I haven't seen the man since, but I know he's still out there. He's not following me anymore, but the fear hasn't gone away. I feel it every time I look at my phone, every time I talk to my family. They don't know, but I do. Someone is watching us, and I don't know why or what they're waiting for. Every day, I live with the fear that something worse is coming. I don't know what they want, but I can't escape it. And that's the worst part. The waiting. Not knowing when or if it will end. I wasn't planning to clean the attic that day. I had only gone up there to find an old box of winter clothes, but then I saw it. Pushed behind some old furniture and covered in dust, there was a phone. Not a modern one, like an old Nokia or something. It was small, gray, and looked almost brand new. I don't even remember ever seeing it before. I picked it up, expecting it to be dead, but the screen lit up. No apps, no contacts, not even a wallpaper, just the basic clock and the old signal bars. I didn't think much of it. Probably belonged to the house's previous owner. Still, Something about it seemed strange. Why had nobody taken it? Why did it look like it had been waiting for me? I didn't like the feeling, so I tossed it into my backpack and went downstairs. I kept it on the table in the living room, more as a joke to show friends later. I never really believed in ghosts or haunted objects, and the phone seemed more like a forgotten piece of tech than something to worry about. That was until midnight. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear every small sound. I was getting ready for bed when I heard a noise from the living room. A ring. Not my phone. Not anything I recognized. Then I remembered the phone from the attic. I froze for a second, my heart beating too fast. Who could be calling an old phone with no contacts? Curiosity got the best of me. I walked to the living room and saw it glowing, the screen flashing with unknown number. I shouldn't have answered it, but I did. As soon as I picked up, a voice on the other end said my name. Not in a questioning way, like they were guessing, but like they knew. The tone was calm, too calm for midnight, too calm for a stranger. I tried to laugh it off, asking, "Who is this?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, it began to tell me things, personal things, details about my life, secrets, things I'd never told anyone. They mentioned my childhood, specific events that no one else should know. I felt sick. My head was spinning. How could anyone know all that? I asked again, this time more desperately, "Who the hell are you?" The voice just laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was the kind of laugh that made me feel small, like I was being watched. I hung up, heart racing. I stared at the phone, my fingers shaking. This was some sort of prank, right? Someone messing with me. But no one I knew would have gone this far or known that much. I tried to turn the phone off, but nothing happened. I pulled out the battery, thinking that would end it. For a few moments, everything was quiet again, and I started to breathe easier. Then it rang again. Even without the battery, the damn thing was ringing. I didn't answer it this time, but the ringing didn't stop. Every few minutes, it would start again, always with that unknown number flashing on the screen. By the time 3 a.m. rolled around, I was ready to throw it out the window, but something held me back. Fear, maybe. Or maybe it was something worse, curiosity. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same call. The voice continued to talk, revealing even darker secrets about me. Things I'd tried to forget. Shameful things. I started to wonder if this wasn't a joke, but someone really watching me. The thought of being spied on felt worse than any ghost story. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I started to drift off, the phone rang again, dragging me back into that nightmare. Days passed, and the phone wouldn't leave me alone. I tried everything, disconnecting the power in the house, throwing it into a lake, smashing it. But somehow, every night at midnight, it would be back on my table, ringing. I had to know who was behind this. I thought maybe it was someone from my past, someone holding a grudge. Maybe they had planted the phone for me to find. Maybe it was all part of a twisted plan. I searched through old emails, messages, anything that could explain how they knew so much about me. But nothing made sense. It was like the phone was feeding on my fear, growing more personal with every call. Finally, after a week of sleepless nights, it happened. The last call. I was too exhausted to do anything but answer. The voice didn't bother with secrets this time. It simply said, "I know where you are." My skin turned cold, the kind of cold that feels like a hand gripping your spine. I looked around the room, but everything was where it should be. The voice continued, "I'm closer than you think." My eyes scanned the living room. That's when I saw it. A notebook on the shelf, one that had been lost for years. My old journal. I hadn't touched it since college. I knew what was in there. The same secrets the voice had been revealing all week. My stomach dropped. This wasn't some stranger on the other end of the line. Whoever was calling had been in my house, going through my things, reading my private thoughts. The call ended, but the fear didn't. Now, every creak, every shadow, every small noise makes me jump. The phone hasn't rung again, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Someone out there knows everything about me, and one day they'll come back. I don't know if I'll be ready. I never wanted this job. Night shift security at an old abandoned factory was not exactly a dream, but I needed the money. It was supposed to be easy. Walk around a few times, check that the doors are locked, and make sure nobody breaks in. Simple. But from the moment I stepped into that place, it felt wrong. I can't explain it exactly, but the silence in there wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like it was watching me. The factory was huge, a long maze of empty hallways, rusted machines, and flickering lights. It had been shut down for years, but they hired me to keep an eye on it because of recent break-ins. It's not like anyone wanted to steal old metal, though. I guess the place had a reputation, a bad one. I didn't think much about it at first. I just wanted to get through my shift. That first night started like any other. I made my rounds, checked all the entrances, and tried to kill time scrolling through my phone. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady, coming from the far end of the hall. I stood still, my heart pounding in my chest. I called out, "Hello?" but got no answer. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the building settling. Old places make weird sounds, right? But the footsteps didn't stop. They kept coming, closer and closer. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check it out, but there was nobody there. The hallway was empty, just me and the dark. I shook it off, convinced it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next night, it happened again. Footsteps, always around the same time, echoing in the distance. I started feeling uneasy, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting someone or something to be there. But every time I checked, nothing. Empty halls, broken machines, and the low of the old building. It felt like it was alive, like it was breathing with me. Then, on the third night, I found the door. It was in a part of the factory I hadn't really noticed before, a small hallway that led to a dead end. I wasn't sure why I hadn't seen it on the map, so I checked the blueprints they gave me. That's when I realized the door wasn't supposed to be there. The blueprint showed a solid wall where the door now stood. Curiosity got the better of me, even though I knew I shouldn't go inside. The door was unlocked, so I pushed it open. The room was small, almost claustrophobic, and smelled damp, like it hadn't been touched in years, but it had. There was a blanket on the floor, an old tin can, and some papers scattered around. Someone had been living there, or hiding there. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't alone in this factory. I didn't stay long in that room. I backed out slowly, shut the door, and tried to act like I hadn't seen it. But I couldn't get it out of my head. Each night after, the footsteps returned, louder and closer. Sometimes, I thought I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked, there was nothing. My nerves were getting worse. Sleep wasn't coming easy, and every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone was standing over me. The paranoia started eating at me. I couldn't stop thinking about that room. I asked one of the other guards if they knew anything about it, but he just shrugged it off, said I was probably tired, maybe hearing things. "This place messes with your head if you let it," he told me. But his words didn't help. If anything, they made me more afraid. What if it was in my head? Was I losing it? I went back to the room a few nights later. I had to see if anything had changed, if maybe there was more evidence of someone staying there. When I opened the door again, I found the blanket and the papers just as I had left them, but there was something new. A small, rusted knife lay in the middle of the floor. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen that before. It was placed there deliberately, like someone wanted me to find it. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. I spent the next few nights listening more carefully, watching every corner of the factory, trying to catch whoever was playing these games. One night, I finally saw it. As I turned a corner, my flashlight caught the briefest glimpse of movement. Someone, a man, ducking into one of the side rooms. I ran after him, but when I got there, the room was empty. It didn't make sense. There was no way he could have gotten out so quickly. That was when I realized it wasn't just footsteps or shadows anymore. Someone was in the factory with me. I wasn't imagining it. I was sure of it. I went back to the room with the knife, but this time, it was gone. The blanket, the papers, everything. The room was completely empty, like nobody had ever been there at all. I quit the job the next day. I didn't care about the money anymore. Something was wrong with that factory, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out what. Even now, weeks later, I can still hear the footsteps in my head sometimes. Slow, steady, getting closer. I don't know what was happening in that place. Maybe someone really was living there, hiding out in the shadows. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, like the other guard said. But I can't shake the feeling that if I had stayed one more night, I wouldn't have made it out. I still dream about that room sometimes. About what could have happened if I hadn't opened that door. I moved into this house last summer, thinking it was going to be peaceful. Quiet neighborhood, big tree, and the kind of place where nothing weird ever happens. That was until the new neighbor moved in next door. They didn't make any noise during the day, no moving trucks, nothing. One morning, I just noticed their car in the driveway, curtains tightly drawn across every window. I didn't think much of it at first. People have their privacy, right? But there was something off. Days went by and I never saw anyone coming in or out of the house. No lights during the day. At night, though, it was different. I'd hear strange noises, like shoveling or digging, always around midnight. At first, I thought it was my imagination, or maybe construction work, but it never stopped. One night, I stayed up late and really listened. The sound was rhythmic, constant, like someone digging a hole. I went to the window, but everything was dark. The noises were definitely coming from next door, though. It gave me chills, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they were fixing something, who knows? A week later, I decided to introduce myself. I thought maybe meeting them would make me feel less weird about the whole thing. I walked over during the day, figuring that'd be a normal time. I knocked on their door, no answer. I was about to leave when the door opened, and there they were, standing in the doorway. They were pale, really pale, like they hadn't been outside in years. The weird thing was, before I could say anything, they said my name. They didn't smile, didn't offer a handshake or anything. They just said my name in a flat voice, "You should stay away from my property." I was taken aback. How did they know my name? I hadn't introduced myself yet. I tried to laugh it off, saying I was just being neighborly, but their expression didn't change. Their eyes never met mine. It was like they were looking right through me, or past me, I don't know. "You don't want to be here," they added, and then closed the door without another word. I walked back to my house feeling more disturbed than I cared to admit. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. The digging sounds were back, louder this time. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore it, but my mind kept wandering. What were they digging for every night? Why did they never come outside during the day? And how did they know my name before I even spoke? I started losing sleep. The noises wouldn't stop, and every time I heard them, my heart would race. My thoughts got darker, imagining all sorts of things. What if they were hiding something? Or worse, someone? I became obsessed. I started watching the house during the day, waiting for any sign of life, but there was nothing. No movement, no lights, just the same covered windows and silence. One night, after hours of hearing that damn digging again, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and headed into my backyard, moving toward the fence separating our properties. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. I climbed over the fence, landing softly in their yard. Everything was quiet, too quiet. I switched on the flashlight and scanned the ground, and that's when I saw it. Fresh dirt, a big patch of it. It looked like a pit, maybe 5 or 6 feet deep. My stomach twisted. What were they burying? Before I could take another step, I heard it, their voice. "You shouldn't have come." I froze. The voice was calm, way too calm for the situation. I turned around, and there they were, standing just outside the back door, watching me. I couldn't see their face clearly in the dark, but I could feel their eyes on me, like they'd been expecting me. For a moment, I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, my mind racing through every worst-case scenario. Were they going to kill me? Was this it? But they didn't move. They just stood there, waiting. I didn't wait to find out what was next. I ran. I scrambled over the fence and sprinted back to my house, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I locked every window, every door, trying to calm my breathing. I sat in the dark for hours, waiting for something, anything to happen, but nothing did. No footsteps, no knocks on the door, just silence. The next morning, I found something slipped under my front door. At first, I thought it was junk mail or a flyer, but when I picked it up, my heart sank. It was a photo of me, standing in their yard last night, right next to the pit. There were no words, no explanation, just that single, terrifying image. I haven't slept since. I don't hear the digging anymore, but I know they're still there, watching. Every night, I feel their eyes on my house, like they're waiting for me to make another mistake. I don't know what they're planning, but I'm too scared to find out. Should I call the police? Or would that make things worse? I don't know what to do, and I'm terrified that whatever's coming, it's already too late. I'm not sure if I'm losing my mind. I need to write this down because things are getting blurry. It started a few nights ago, and now everything feels wrong. 3 nights ago, I got a call from my best friend, Mike. It was around midnight, and I was just about to sleep. His voice sounded strange, panicked. He said he needed my help and told me to come over. His house wasn't far, so I grabbed my jacket and keys without asking too many questions. Something in his voice made me feel like there wasn't time to waste. The drive was short, but my heart was pounding the whole way. I kept replaying his voice in my head. It wasn't just fear I heard in him. It was something deeper, something broken. When I got to his house, all the lights were off, which was weird because Mike always left the porch light on. I knocked on the door, waited a few seconds, then knocked again, harder this time. His parents answered. His mom looked at me, confused, while his dad stood behind her, looking just as surprised. I stammered, "Is Mike home? He called me, said he needed help." His mom's face fell immediately, and she looked like she might cry. His dad cleared his throat and told me, Mike died 3 days ago." I froze. At first, I thought they were messing with me. Maybe this was some sick joke Mike had set up, but their faces were so serious, so full of grief, that I realized they weren't joking. My mouth went dry. "What do you mean he died?" I just got a call from him." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the recent calls to show them. Sure enough, Mike's name was right there, time-stamped just 15 minutes ago. His dad looked at me, a mix of confusion and something else. Pity, maybe. His mom couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She whispered, "We buried him yesterday." I was shaking. I didn't understand. I stared at my phone again, trying to make sense of it. There it was, Mike's name, his number. I had talked to him. I heard his voice. Before I could say anything else, my phone rang. Mike's name flashed on the screen. My stomach twisted. His mom gasped, stepping back like she had seen a ghost. His dad just stood there, wide-eyed, not moving. Without thinking, I answered. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end at first, just the sound of heavy breathing. Then, Mike's voice, soft, almost like a whisper, said, "Help me." I almost dropped the phone. His voice didn't sound right. It was him, but it wasn't. It was broken, distorted, like he was struggling to speak. I couldn't get any words out. My throat felt like it was closing up. Before I could say anything back, the line went dead. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the screen. I felt cold, like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over me. His parents didn't say anything either, just staring at me with these hollow eyes. I don't even remember how I left. I just remember getting in my car and driving, my hands shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept looking at my phone, waiting for another call, but nothing came. I couldn't focus at work, and everything felt off, like I was walking through a dream that was slowly turning into a nightmare. That night, I decided I couldn't just let it go. Something was wrong. I needed to know what happened to Mike. I started digging into the details of his death. It was a car accident, they said. But when I went to the spot where it happened, things didn't add up. The skid marks didn't match the story his parents had told me. It didn't look like he lost control of the car. It looked like he was forced off the road. I asked around, but no one seemed to know anything. Or maybe they didn't want to talk about it. I felt like I was going crazy. Every time I thought I was getting closer to an answer, it slipped away. And then, last night, the calls started again. At first, I ignored it. I didn't want to hear that voice again, but it didn't stop. Over and over, Mike's number kept calling until I couldn't take it anymore. I answered, my hand shaking. This time, the voice was clearer. He said the same thing. "Help me." But there was something else in the background, a faint sound I couldn't make out at first. Then I realized it was crying. I don't know why, but I asked, "Where are you?" There was a long pause, and then the line cut out again. I couldn't sleep after that. I kept thinking about what his voice sounded like, how desperate it was, and that crying, like someone was trapped. I decided I needed to go back to the crash site to see if I missed something. When I got there, I found something strange. Hidden in the grass near the road, I found Mike's phone. It was smashed up, but I could still tell it was his. I don't know how it ended up there or why no one found it before, but when I picked it up, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and my heart stopped. It was a call from my own number. I don't know what to do anymore. The calls keep coming, but now it's my voice on the other end. And every time I answer, it feels like I'm getting pulled closer to something dark, something I can't escape. I'm scared that soon I won't be able to tell what's real anymore. I agreed to house sit for a friend of mine who owns this old, quiet place in the countryside. I'm from the city, so when she asked me to help, I thought it would be a nice break. "It's peaceful," she said, "far away from all the noise and stress of the city." And she was right. It's silent, almost too silent. The house itself is old. It creaks. The floors groan when you step, and the windows are tall, with heavy wooden frames that seem older than me. I could hear the wind moving through the trees outside, and at first it was calming. But as the sun set and the darkness filled the house, that calmness started to feel like something else. The first night I heard it, scratching. Faint but clear. At first I thought it was the wind, or maybe a tree branch scraping against the window. But it kept happening, slow and deliberate, like someone or something was testing the windows, looking for a way in. I told myself it had to be an animal, maybe a raccoon or some stray cat. But deep down, it didn't feel right. The scratching was too constant. It stopped just as quickly as it started, and after lying awake for what felt like hours, I eventually fell asleep. In the morning, I tried to forget about it. I made coffee and tried to enjoy the view outside. It's beautiful out here, I'll admit. Tall trees, rolling hills, and no one around for miles. But when I went to the window to check if there was a tree close enough to scratch the glass, I saw something that made my stomach twist. There were marks carved into the wooden frame of the window. Not just random scratches, but words. Leave. The letters were rough, like someone had used a knife or a sharp tool. My hands were shaking as I leaned in closer. Another word below the first one said, "Not safe." I stepped back, my heart racing. Who would have done this? It couldn't have been there before, right? I would have noticed it when I arrived. I tried to convince myself that maybe I just hadn't seen it. The second night, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. The wind outside seemed louder, the creaks of the house more constant. I checked all the doors and windows twice before going to bed, but it didn't help. I was more aware of every noise, every shift of the floorboards. And then it started again. The scratching. This time, it was louder, more insistent. It wasn't just at one window. It came from multiple windows, like something was circling the house, testing every entrance. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that someone or something was outside. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal out here. Of course, I checked the windows again. There was no one there, but the sound didn't stop. I barely slept that night, lying in bed with my eyes wide open, listening to that horrible scratching. The next day, I checked the windows again, hoping the messages were gone. They weren't. In fact, there were more now. Watching was scratched into the window frame of the living room, and on the back door, just one word: run. I should have left then. I knew I should have, but something kept me there. Maybe I didn't want to believe it was real. Maybe I thought it was just some sick prank. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that someone was messing with me. By the third night, I was jumpy, paranoid. I didn't want to sleep. I just sat in the living room, staring out at the dark woods. The scratching didn't start right away this time. It was quiet for a while, and I almost thought it was over. But then I heard it again. This time, it wasn't scratching. It was tapping, slow and steady, like someone knocking gently on the glass. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I walked to the window and looked out. At first, I didn't see anything, just darkness. But then, near the tree line, I saw a figure. It was too far away to make out any details, but it was there, standing still, watching the house. My breath caught in my throat. My heart pounded so hard I thought I would pass out. I remembered a story my friend had told me, something about someone disappearing out here. She had laughed it off like it was just a local rumor, something to scare the city people. But now, standing there, looking at that figure, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. I didn't sleep at all that night. The figure stayed there, just standing, until the sun began to rise. Then, it was gone. I wanted to leave. I needed to. But when I went to grab my things, I saw it. The last message. This time, it wasn't carved into the window. It was on the front door, scratched deep into the wood. My name, followed by 2 words: "You're next." I ran. I didn't care what was out there. I just had to get away from that house. I jumped into my car and didn't look back. I still don't know if it was a prank, some stalker, or something worse. All I know is I'll never go back to that place again. And if you ever get asked to house sit in the middle of nowhere, say no. You don't know what's really out there. I moved into the apartment a month ago. It was old and a little creepy, but it was cheap, and I needed somewhere to stay. The landlord didn't ask too many questions, and I figured it was good enough for me. It's in a quiet part of town. Too quiet, honestly. I didn't see many neighbors, just a few people here and there, mostly keeping to themselves. I didn't think much of it at first. On the second day, while I was unpacking, I noticed something strange in the bedroom. One of the floorboards was loose. I almost ignored it, but my curiosity got the best of me. I pried it open, and there it was, a journal. It was old, dusty, the pages yellowed and worn. The cover was plain, no name, no title. I flipped through it, expecting maybe some old notes, a forgotten diary, but it was worse than that, way worse. The first few entries weren't too strange. The person who wrote it talked about the neighborhood, how they didn't feel safe. They mentioned strange people hanging around the building at night, odd noises, things like that. But then, the journal started to get darker. The writer described violent attacks in the area, people going missing, assaults, and no one ever finding out what happened. They wrote that the police never cared, never really looked into it. The entries got more detailed with each crime. The writer seemed to know too much. They wrote things that only someone very close to the events would know, things that weren't public. And they hinted that it was all connected, that it was part of some larger plan. I started reading more carefully. The journal kept mentioning the next one, the next person who would live in the apartment. That's when I realized the writer was talking about me. They wrote about how the crimes were all leading up to this moment, how everything that happened was practice for what was going to happen to the next tenant. Each page was like a twisted countdown, and I was at the end of it. I felt a chill run down my spine. I slammed the journal shut and shoved it back under the floorboard, hoping that ignoring it would make the whole thing go away. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I read, about how the writer seemed so certain, so obsessed. I told myself it was just a sick joke, maybe someone trying to scare the new tenant. But then I started noticing things. The first time was 2 days after finding the journal. I saw a man standing across the street, staring at my window. At first I thought he was just waiting for someone, but he didn't move. He just stood there for what felt like hours. When I finally worked up the courage to go outside, he was gone. I told myself I imagined it, that I was being paranoid because of the journal, but then it kept happening. Strange noises at night, footsteps in the hallway outside my door, small things out of place in the apartment, like someone had been inside. The feeling that I was being watched became unbearable. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. I tried talking to the police, but they didn't take me seriously. They said I was overthinking it, that maybe the journal was from a bored tenant trying to mess with someone. Even my friends told me I was overreacting, that I should relax and not worry so much. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I tried to forget, something would happen to remind me that this was real. One night, I came home from work, and the door to my apartment was unlocked. I know I locked it before I left. My stomach dropped. Inside, things were moved around, but nothing was taken. It was like someone had been there, but they didn't want to steal anything. They just wanted me to know they were there. That's when I remembered the journal. I ran to the bedroom and pulled up the floorboard. The journal was still there, but there was something new inside. A note, written on a small piece of paper in the same handwriting as the journal. It said, "You're next." I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the note. My mind raced. I had to leave. I had to get out of there. But something in me, maybe stupidity or fear, kept me there. I wanted to know who was doing this. I wanted to prove that I wasn't just some helpless victim, that I could fight back. I thought I could outsmart whoever was behind this. I started planning. I installed extra locks on the door, set up some cheap cameras around the apartment. I tried to stay alert, to catch whoever was messing with me. But every night, the noises continued. The man across the street kept watching. My apartment still felt wrong, like someone was always just behind me, just out of sight. A few nights ago, everything went silent. No more noises, no more footsteps, nothing. It was almost worse than the sounds. The silence hung in the air, heavy and thick. That's when I knew something was coming. Last night, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone breathing. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't in my head. Someone was in my room. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just lay there, frozen, listening. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually, the breathing stopped. When I finally dared to open my eyes, the room was empty. But the journal was lying open on the floor, flipped to the last page. The page that described what was supposed to happen to me. I'm writing this now because I don't know if I'll get the chance to later. I think tonight is the night. The plan is in motion, and I'm not sure I can stop it. If something happens to me, I hope someone finds this and they take it seriously. Because whoever wrote that journal, they weren't lying. And I think they're coming for me now. I was just trying to get home. It was late, and my GPS wasn't working properly, so I ended up driving in circles through some back roads. After what felt like hours, I saw a small town ahead, the kind of place you drive past without even thinking about stopping. The streets were quiet, no one walking around, but the lights in the houses were on. I figured I'd stop for directions or maybe find a gas station. As I parked my car, I noticed people looking at me. At first, I thought maybe it was because they didn't recognize me, like I was an outsider. Small towns are like that, I've heard, but something felt off. They weren't just staring, they looked like they knew me. I got out of the car and an old man sitting on a bench near the corner of the street waved at me. "You're back," he said, smiling like I was an old friend. I gave him a confused look and told him he had the wrong person, but he just laughed. "Don't be silly, Lena. We all thought you'd never come back." "Lena?" I tried to explain that my name wasn't Lena, but the man wasn't listening. Another woman, probably in her 40s, stepped out of a small shop. She stared for a second and then said, "I knew it. I told everyone you'd return." I was completely lost now. I had never been to this town before, and yet these people acted like they knew me, like they had been waiting for me. I told the woman she was mistaken, but she just smiled. "It's been so long. You must be tired." I didn't know what to say. I thought maybe I should just leave, but I had no idea where I was. I needed directions, but how could I ask anyone for help when they were all acting like this? As I walked down the street, more people started to notice me. They were whispering to each other, pointing, but all with the same kind of look, like they'd seen a ghost. A younger guy, maybe around my age, stopped in front of me and said, "We never thought you'd come back after what happened." I didn't know what he was talking about. I told him again, "You've got the wrong person. My name's not Lena. I'm just lost." He didn't believe me. No one did. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Something wasn't right here. It wasn't just a mistake anymore. They were too sure, too confident. I decided to leave, get back in the car, and drive out of here. But when I got back to where I had parked, my car was gone. I swear it was right there. I didn't know if it was stolen or if I had parked somewhere else without realizing. Maybe I was just too freaked out to think straight. I walked back toward the center of town, hoping to find someone who could help me, but everyone just kept staring. They called me Lena, kept asking why I had stayed away for so long. The more they talked, the more I started to feel uneasy. Some of the things they said, they seemed familiar, like I had heard them before, but I couldn't remember where or when. The street started to feel like they were closing in on me. I turned down a different road, but it didn't take me out of the town. It just brought me back to the same place I had started. It didn't make sense. Every road led me back to the square, back to the same faces, the same people who kept insisting I was Lena. I pulled out my phone to call someone, but there was no signal. Of course, I couldn't even Google my way out of here. I kept walking, trying every road, but it was like the town wouldn't let me leave. No matter which way I went, I ended up right back where I started. That's when I saw it. A small notice board near the center of town. On it, there was an old, faded missing person poster. The face on it made my blood run cold. It was me, or at least someone who looked exactly like me. The name at the top? Lena. I backed away, my heart racing. I didn't know what was happening. Was this some kind of joke? I tried to remember where I had been before driving into the town, but it was like a fog in my mind. Pieces of my memory weren't fitting together. Had I been here before? Was I really Lena? No, that couldn't be right. I wasn't her. I knew who I was. But every time I told someone, they just smiled that same smile, the one that said they knew better. I started running, desperate to get out. But every road, every turn, it was all the same. I couldn't escape. I couldn't even think straight anymore. My head was spinning, and the faces of the people were everywhere, watching me, waiting. I tried to find someone, anyone who might listen, but the whole town seemed to be closing in. When I reached a small alleyway, I turned, only to see a group of them standing at the other end. They weren't smiling anymore. "It's time to come home, Lena," one of them said, stepping forward. I backed away, but there was nowhere left to go. They were all around me now, blocking every exit, their eyes fixed on me. I screamed at them that I wasn't Lena, that I didn't know who they thought I was. But as the words came out, even I didn't believe them anymore. Could they be right? Was I her? They reached out, pulling me towards them. I struggled, but it was no use. The last thing I remember was the sound of their voices, all calling me by a name I didn't know, pulling me into a place I didn't belong. And then, nothing. I don't usually scare easily. I've camped alone more times than I can count, but something happened during my last trip that I still can't explain. I'm not sure if anyone will believe me, but I need to tell this. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of it. I went camping alone as usual. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend, just me, my tent, and the forest. I found a spot far from the usual hiking trails, where no one could bother me. The air smelled fresh, the birds were singing, and everything felt normal. It was the peace I needed after a stressful few weeks at work. By the time night fell, I had already set up my tent and made a small fire. Everything was calm, and I was looking forward to a relaxing night under the stars. But then, as I sat by the fire, I heard something strange. At first, it was just a soft sound like the wind or an animal moving through the trees. I didn't think much of it, but after a few minutes, I realized it was something else. It was a voice, a human voice. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I was alone after all. Nobody knew I was there. But then I heard it again, and this time I could make out what it was saying. It was calling my name, my name. From deep in the woods, I sat frozen, listening. The voice was distant but clear. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the wind was making strange sounds. But the more I listened, the more I was sure it was my name. It sounded familiar too, like someone I knew. But how could that be? No one was supposed to be here. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my flashlight. I told myself I was just going to check it out, make sure it was nothing. Maybe it was some lost hiker who needed help. I didn't know what else to think. I had to see. I walked into the trees, leaving the safety of my campsite behind. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, but the woods felt different now. The trees were thicker, and the shadows seemed to move as I passed by. Every step felt heavier, and the voice kept calling my name, pulling me deeper. I walked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. Then I saw it, a small clearing with a tent. It wasn't my tent, but it looked oddly familiar. My heart started pounding as I got closer. The tent was old, dirty, like it had been abandoned for a long time. But that wasn't the strangest part. Inside the tent were my things, clothes I had left at home, a book I hadn't brought on this trip, even my phone, which I had left on the kitchen table at home. Everything was there, laid out neatly as if someone had been living there, or waiting for me. I stood there, my breath caught in my throat. How was this possible? No one could have gotten these things. They were at home, far away from here. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing made sense. Who had set this up? And why? Suddenly, I realized something even worse. The voice, the one that had been calling my name, it hadn't spoken since I reached the tent. It had led me here, to this spot, and then gone silent. A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized whoever was behind this, they knew me. They had been watching me, maybe for longer than I knew. I felt exposed, like I was being watched even now. The woods felt too quiet. I had to get out of there. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the noise I was making. I just wanted to get back to my campsite, to pack up and leave. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every branch that snapped under my feet made me jump. The forest seemed to close in on me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When I finally made it back to my campsite, my stomach dropped. Everything was destroyed. My tent was torn open, my gear scattered everywhere. It looked like someone had gone through it all, wrecking everything. But it wasn't just random. It was like someone had been searching for something. And then I saw them. Footprints. They led away from the campsite, back into the woods. Fresh, deep footprints in the dirt. Whoever it was, they had been here, probably watching me while I was out chasing that voice. I grabbed what I could and ran back to the car, not looking back. I didn't care about leaving things behind. I just needed to get out. The whole drive back, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. I still don't know who or what set up that tent or how they got my things. Part of me wonders if I imagined it all. But the fear I felt was real. The footprints were real. I've tried to forget about it, but I can't shake the feeling that someone out there knows me, that they were watching me long before I ever heard that voice. I haven't gone camping alone since. I'm not sure I ever will again. A few weeks ago, I was sitting in a small cafe, one I go to often because it's quiet and the coffee is decent. It was just a regular afternoon. I was alone, staring at my phone, when a man sat down at my table without asking. He didn't order anything, just slid into the chair across from me like he belonged there. He introduced himself as a detective. I can't remember his name now, which is strange because he said it clearly. Anyway, he started talking, asking if I knew someone named Daniel, an old friend of mine from years ago. The thing is, I hadn't seen Daniel in a long time. We used to hang out in college, but after graduation, we drifted apart. Last I heard, he moved to another city and we just lost touch. The detective said Daniel had been missing for a while and that there were other disappearances too. He asked if I'd seen him recently, or if I knew anything about his life now. I told him the truth. I hadn't spoken to Daniel in years. The whole time, the man didn't take notes or anything, just stared at me with this intense, focused look, as if he was trying to figure me out. It was uncomfortable. He didn't act like a normal detective. When he stood up to leave, he said something strange. "If you remember anything, you know where to find me." But he didn't leave a card or tell me how to contact him. It felt like a warning, not a request. I tried to shake it off, but the encounter stuck with me. That night, lying in bed, I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Why was a detective talking to me about someone I hadn't seen in so long? The more I thought about it, the weirder it felt. I hadn't heard anything about Daniel being missing, and I checked the news. Nothing. Over the next few days, the unease grew. I started to feel paranoid, like I was being watched. Every time I went back to the cafe, I kept expecting to see the detective, but he was never there. So, I decided to look into it myself. I called the local police station, asking if they had a detective working on any disappearances. I didn't mention the whole story, just asked generally. The person on the phone seemed confused, said no detectives by that name worked there, and no one was investigating a Daniel. That threw me off. I went back to the cafe, asking the staff if they remembered the guy. They all looked at me like I was crazy. The girl behind the counter swore up and down that I'd been sitting alone the whole time. No one else sat with me. My heart started pounding when she said that. I decided to reach out to some old friends, people who might have kept in touch with Daniel. A few of them had heard from him sporadically, but nothing recent. When I brought up the detective, none of them knew what I was talking about. One friend even asked if I was sure I met someone at the cafe because, "You've been stressed lately, maybe you're mixing things up." That really hit me. Was I? But I couldn't shake the memory. It was too clear, too real. I kept digging. I even tried to find Daniel online, but it was like he'd vanished. His old social media accounts hadn't been active for years. I asked people in our old college group, but it felt like Daniel just slipped out of everyone's lives without a trace. It made no sense. The detective was real, right? I wasn't imagining this. The more I thought about it, the less certain I became. I started to question my own memory. Was the detective really sitting across from me that day? Why didn't anyone else remember seeing him? I couldn't even picture his face anymore. It was blurry in my mind, like something I had dreamed. One night, I decided to go to Daniel's old apartment. Maybe there was something I missed. I hadn't been there in years, but I remembered the address. When I got there, the building looked different, older, dirtier, almost abandoned. I knocked on the door of his apartment. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. After a few moments, I realized no one was home. Or maybe no one had lived there in a long time. The door creaked open a bit, like it wasn't fully closed. I peeked inside, dusty, furniture covered in sheets, as if no one had touched the place in months, maybe years. As I stood there, I had this sudden, overwhelming feeling of being watched. My skin prickled, and I turned around, heart racing. Across the street, there was a man. He was standing there, just watching me. And I swear to you, it was the detective. He didn't move, just stared. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped toward him, ready to shout or run, I didn't even know. But as soon as I blinked, he was gone. Just like that. I hurried back to my car, looking over my